have next with us for True Life. I thought being a hashtag essay grad would be easier. We have Heather Stevens, the Assistant Director of Student Advocacy and Divisional Initiatives at the University of Miami, and Whitney Platzer Reagan, Assistant Dean of Students and Director of the William W. Sandler Junior Center for Alcohol and Other Drug Education, also at the University of Miami. Heather, Whitney, I'll let you take it away.
Hello, everyone. Let me make my screen full screen really quick. I looked this up earlier today. Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. So we have hopefully an engaging presentation to have a conversation around being a student affairs grad. We also tried in some ways to kind of open this conversation if we have folks who are not if we have folks who are not currently grads but are still participating in are not looking to be grads but are still participating in our session. So we're hoping to be active and engaged. We have are using a service called can you correct me, Whitney? I'm sorry.
Mentimeter. You're right. Yeah.
So that everyone can kind of like participate in questions and we can do some engaging dialogue. So who we are. So I think that our title's already shared, but just a little bit about me. I have been at the University of Miami for quite some time, and my kind of like passion areas involve student advocacy. So that involves a lot of conversations with senior university leadership and figuring out how to both advocate for student identity and student purpose, but also ensuring that we're also focus on academic continuity and academic mission at our institution. And I've been very honored to be able to be connected with Whitney. Actually, we connected through graduate school and we have been NASPA friends ever since. And that's kind of where we were coming from with this session today.
Yeah, so thanks, Heather. I miss seeing you on campus every day. But yeah, so I'm Whitney O'Regan. I'm an assistant dean of students. So as that kind of outlines, I work in student conduct. But my passion area is really working with our undergraduate peer educators on campus who facilitate educational workshops and programs around alcohol and other drug education. And I'm really passionate about the influence that peer education has with our college students. And I've seen kind of the influence that that has had on the graduate assistants that I get to supervise and helping them motivate our peer educators in making healthy and smart decisions, which I think will come across today in our presentation.
So what are we talking about today? We decided to focus on kind of 4 common challenges that either we experienced when we were in graduate school or we've really observed kind of graduate students who are transitioning from undergrad to grad or transitioning from a gap year to grad commonly kind of like falter on. And so we wanted to kind of like start a conversation related to that. So those 4 common challenges are kind of office etiquette, interacting in person, professionalism, expectations, and then managing uncertainty, which is kind of an addition that we added considering COVID-19, because we wanted to be conscious to times and what's actually happening in everyone's reality. So to get us started, one of the things that I think is really cool and interesting about offices is that you get to interact with other human beings, but everyone has different perspectives and priorities. So feel free to go to the link menti, MENTI.com, and you'll use the code 98342 to be able to participate in this poll, and then we'll keep using this same experience throughout the presentation. So I'll just give everyone a second to be able to participate. We'll hop on too. And so some of these things on this slide might seem a little silly, and some of them might be more relatable. But our key piece here that we're seeing is like, right, like everyone seems to like coffee breaks or insert tea or whatever kind of like break you like having instead. Sometimes it might be helpful to have back-to-back meetings. When I was looking through it myself, I was thinking like, well, in some days I'd rather just have all my meetings at once so that I can have concentrated work time, but other days maybe not. And maybe that's harder when we're at home too. And then some of us too like to have detailed schedules, and some of us might not. So that's kind of where to situate ourselves is that this concept in this frame about like something that might be super annoying for me, like a coworker constantly talking to me, might be not super annoying for my extrovert friend who actually loves when they're getting talked to and getting constant feedback while they're working throughout the day. Yeah. So to jump onto a couple concepts with office etiquette, and thank you all for participating in that. So here are some core concepts. So first, relationship building. A big piece of working in an office and being in a professional space, whether you've been in an office before or you haven't, a lot of it involves just kind of acknowledging people. I know that at the beginning of the presentation, and this is something that I'm sometimes really struggle with, is remembering to share my pronouns and recognizing how important it is to share how I am showing up in a space. That also means that I give other people around me the space to be able to be acknowledged and be spoken to, right? Or treated how they prefer being treated. So some of that is like knowing who to talk to. So it's important to acknowledge someone, whether you think their title, you perceive that their title is important in an office or not. They're humans in an office, so it's important to acknowledge them. And it's sometimes hard because maybe you're having a bad day and you just don't want to talk to anyone and don't want to communicate with anyone, but we still need to kind of treat each other like human beings because we want to do that too. In terms of sharing space, sometimes as a grad, you might be sharing an office space with undergraduate students. You might have a cubicle, you might have your own desk, you might not, you might only have common space. So it's important to remember that that space that you're in, even if it's your office or your cubicle or your space, is still shared space. It's still space that your supervisor might enter, coworkers might enter, and so it's important to treat that shared space like that. And then behaviors, right? So a lot of times the balancing work, that question of like, I like to have lots of extra work, I like an expectation that my supervisor is going to give me extra work, extra responsibility. You need to remember that if you're work at your office, that you need to focus on your work. And sometimes as a grad, you have schoolwork and you have work at the same time. And having that conversation with your supervisor, you got to have that conversation. You can't expect to be allowed to do homework in an office setting unless you've had that conversation with your supervisor, because maybe that's not appropriate. And in most cases, it's probably not appropriate to do not work things at work. And also think that you're role modeling for your students. So if you treat your job not seriously, your students may also do that. And then that same concept with time in the office. So sometimes there may be an expectation that during certain times, like my graduate assistantship in graduate school was in orientation. And so during orientation time, it is all hands on deck. We're working pretty long hours. And so my supervisor was very flexible with me to be able to figure out where I could do alternative things. And I also took on additional responsibilities in my second year when we had an opening in our office. And that's a conversation I'll get into a little bit later, is kind of that extra space, but we might be functioning in student affairs a little more bare bones into the future. That is often a common thing during budget crunch times. So considering that might be a time to be very specific and negotiate specifically with your supervisor and creating that kind of expectation early on. But I also know that Whitney will touch on that too. So cool. So I just wanted to get a couple more opinions from folks before we just move on. So what are some characteristics of a work environment where you really thrive? So what's something that you enjoy doing? The only purpose of sharing this is so that we can also acknowledge some difference, but also think about where, reflect on ourselves, like things that we need. So that's helpful when you go into an interview to know what you're looking for. So collaborating, being independent, creative brainstorming. There's some great ones. Oh, closed door. That's a great thing to share. Some of us really need that space, and it's important to recognize that. Oh, a window too. Yeah, it's the best. Oh my gosh.
Natural light. Nothing like natural light.
Yeah. And sometimes we can't have that, so we have to figure out how we can. Oh yeah, that's also very important with that office etiquette piece, is that sometimes our colleagues don't want to talk about what they did on the weekend. And I know Whitney will touch on that a little bit too, is that as a graduate student, it might be not appropriate to talk about that as well, since you're working with students. Coffee breaks, yeah, always coffee breaks. And being inclusive too, right? Great. Well, thank you all. We're going to, just for time's sake, move on to that next piece.
Okay, so one of the things that actually one of your first impressions is going to be your most important impression, and that often comes when you start to search for that SA grad assistantship. And one of the really important things is the cover letter and resume. And specifically, I know you've heard several times about how important that is, but really utilizing the people around you and your friends to make sure that what you're writing makes sense, and that what you're communicating is what you actually want to be communicating, right? So I'll give you an example from personal experience. I wasn't a very active student leader undergrad, and I actually earned a BFA in graphic design. And so while humble brag, my resume looked beautiful, it just wasn't getting me the opportunities I wanted in student affairs. And so when I was able to really connect with some former mentors, some peers, to say, here, look at my resume, look how beautiful it is, why am I not getting any bites? They looked at me and said, yeah, like, this is great that it has a beautiful font, but this doesn't tell me anything about your skills or how you can assist with program planning or what your experiences are in managing a budget or confront people about policy violations, because I was looking at conduct assistantships. And so it really was an awakening moment for me, because I thought that I was doing things that were really providing me with opportunities, and in the end it was just asking for help that I really needed to do to push those doors in. So I would encourage you to talk to people who are outside of your school, outside of your major, use career services, and ask friends that don't have the same interest in student affairs to review your cover letter and resume, because they're going to be able to provide a perspective that you might not get on your own. One of the best lessons I learned as a student affairs grad that I always pay forward is that anything written can always be forwarded. So what does this mean? This means that an email that you draft to your student that you're supervising, this means that a text message you respond to your supervisor at 8 o'clock at night from, anything can be screenshot, anything can be forwarded. And so it's really important you think about what you're putting in writing and the inferred tone, right? So texting is often a space for miscommunication. And as fun as it is to use emoji, GIFs, and really communicate in a fun way, we want to think about the fact that that could get screenshot and forwarded to either your supervisor or vice president for affairs, go anywhere when it's out there in the internet ether, right? And especially in this time when we are, where we might be working in the fall, when you might assistantship, it's really important to think about what you're putting down to digital paper and how you're representing yourself on the internet. And then lastly, I really just want to emphasize using the internet as a resource to figure out who you're communicating with and make sure that you have the full picture before hitting send on that email. So someone mentioned how inclusivity is very critical and important to our workplaces, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. So that means that it might take the extra step to log on to an institutional website and to make sure that you get the full picture of someone before you send them an email. So a common mistake a lot of graduate students make when applying for graduate assistantships with me is that they assume that my first name is Dean. And then the second assumption that because they assume my first name is Dean, that I identify as a male. So I can't tell you how many times a day I get an email that says Mr. O'Regan, when actually my name is Whitney O'Regan and my title is Dean. So taking that extra is really important. And so if I click to the next slide, let's say that you are in your assistantship and your supervisor has asked you to find an availability, to reach out to Charlie Smith and find their availability. When you find Charlie Smith in the school directory, their information is listed as, quote, Charlie Smith, EDD, Associate Vice President and Dean of Students. How would you address your email to this person? And this is where you would hopefully type a response. Dear Dr. Smith is a great way to do that. Any other ideas? Okay, dear Charlie. Okay. I'm going to challenge the dear Charlie only because you are, let's say you're serving as your GA in a department and you've never met this person before. And so I think it really is important in your first step forward to stay with institutional title. And while you are, I'll address this a little later, but while you paraprofessional, you're not a full professional. And so it's important to recognize that this person has earned a doctorate and has VP title. And so in that first introductory email, I would err on the side of Dr. Smith or Dean Smith instead of going with Dear Charlie. The positive thing is that if this is too formal for Dr. Smith, then what happens is they reply and they sign it Charlie, and then that gives you permission to call them by that name. So Heather, do we want to move on to the next slide? Thank you for participating. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit about professional identity and how important that is as a student affairs grad. Specifically with job searching and networking and relationships kind of go hand in hand. The world of student affairs is so small, and this won't be the first time or last time that you hear this. As you start to network and build relationships within your assistantship that will lead into job searching opportunities at NASPA conferences or at TPE if you choose to participate in that. Integrity and authenticity are important to maintaining healthy and productive working environments, right? So I think often about how I might not have a relationship in my role. I might not have a relationship with the graduate assistant in student activities, but I will know someone in student activities at a different institution who is thinking about hiring them. And so they will call me because they know me and ask for unofficial reference. And so those relationships are really important. And what does this mean for you, and what does this mean for the big picture of your student affairs kind of experience as a grad and then transitioning professionally? And unfortunately, what it means is that it might seem fun to continue to operate under your identity as a student, but what is the most productive for your future career is really taking on that professional identity. So while it might be challenging, some of your supervisors might treat you like a student, while other people are going to treat you like a full-time staff member. It's up to you to set those expectations on how you're received in the workplace. One of the things that grads are often challenged with are happy hours, right? So I think especially happy hours are often a meaningful experience to build networks and relationships in the division outside of your specific office. And of course, like a professional happy hour is something that happens often. But those aren't the pre-games that you might remember from undergrad, and especially if you're going from an undergrad experience directly into a GA experience, it might be an opportunity for you to redefine yourself. So maybe that means that you're going to the happy hour and you're not indulging in an alcoholic beverage for the first time, right? So you're building those relationships with a clear and sober mind. And that might be something that you talk to your supervisor about. Hey, I work in student conduct and I'm meeting with students every day about their alcohol and drug use. I don't feel comfortable going to a happy hour. Okay, well, so let's think of other ways that we can build that network. I think this also transitions into wearing your office on campus and off campus. So on campus, everyone knows everyone. I work in the Dean of Students office. Heather works in the Vice President's office. We have so many students that overlap. Often I hear things from students before Heather even has a chance to pick up the phone and call me to tell me about it, right? So some of the ways that we as grads might want to rely on our peers in our network, especially in class, is to complain about our office, right? Like complaining is often one of the things that we do to relieve stress. But what I want you to really think about is that what you're communicating verbally to one of your peers is also something that you're communicating to your peer about their office or about their supervisor. And you really need to think about how that is being perceived. So if Heather wants to pop over the next slide for me. So we're going to talk a little bit about perception and expectations. So talking about off campus, I want you to think about if you were a grad in student activities, right? So you're out with your friends, you're out with your grad friends from your cohort, and you see a group of undergrads that you supervise in a student org as part of your assistantship. So what's your next step? Nothing, you're all adults. Maybe you wave them down. Who knew that they hung out at the same places and that you guys have so much in common? Or maybe your option is to leave the bar. There are plenty of other options around the corner and plenty of other places to hang out with your friends. So I'll give people a couple moments to fill this out. Okay, so it seems like we're pretty split between nothing, we're all adults, and leave the bar. So I think the challenge here is that there's no right or wrong answer. We often experience things as student affairs professionals and especially as grads that cause us to think twice about what situations we're in. But really the question for you is, how does your personal and professional values help you move in a direction that is going to be productive to your growth as a professional, right? So this graduate assistantship and the reason that you're going into a program in student affairs is really to gain practical experience so that you are able to find a job, right, and work in student affairs. Often some of the challenges that grads experience is that even if they're not fresh out of undergrad, they have a hard time separating their student leader identity from their identity as an SA grad. So you're no longer that student leader that you're now in the position where you're supervising those student leaders. So Heather, if you want to flip to the next slide for me, thank you. So let's talk about what it means to be a student and a grad assistant in that dichotomy in this situation specifically. So I'll use the example, nothing happened, right? So you're both adults, you see the student at the bar, totally fine. Maybe if you're working in academic advising or in student activities, that's really not a big deal. You've had conversations with your supervisor about expectations and that never really came up. And so it's really not a big deal and it doesn't bother you because you're both of age. My question to you would be, what if that student wasn't of age? What if this is someone that you supervise that you know is violating university policy right now? Would you still sit there and not say anything because you're both adults? That's something only you can answer and something that you should really think about when you start to role model and supervise students. And then my question to you is, as a grad, what if that student that you saw, whether you stayed at the bar or you left the bar, has now missed 3 meetings, which violates their employment contract. So you know that they're going out, you know where they're going out, you've seen them out at night, and that they're not showing up for work, right? And now you have to terminate them. What does that position look like, or that conversation look like from your position as a GA? What if after letting the student go, the student goes into your supervisor's office and says, well, I only missed work because I was out with Whitney at the bar last night, right? So it really takes some nuanced conversation and reflection to realize where you want to stand with this. How do you want to role model and set an expectation for the students that you supervise, as well as how are you leaning on your supervisor's expertise to get experience from them on how to handle situations like this. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no clear answer, but I think relying on your peer network and especially the office that you're going into to work with is important. And then Heather, if you want to go into the perfect. So I think that's where I'm just going to wrap up a little bit about expectations. This is going to be one of the most important steps in developing your identity as a student affairs grad. So expectations for yourself are really important, and those are things that you're going to bring into the conversation before you even step foot on campus, or step foot into your role, I should say. And then meeting with your supervisor and really having open and honest conversations with them. Expectations when you're a GA in student conduct or a GA in housing are going to look really different, right? Expectations in student activities are going to look very different. You might have a graduate assistantship where you don't have any supervisory experience and you don't have any face-to-face, day-to-day contact with undergraduate students. And so maybe that bar situation is not applicable to you. But there will be things that cause you to question a gray area that you will need to rely on your supervisor and your colleagues to make determinations about. And then lastly, just looking at the expectations of your institution. Are your decision makings and the way that you're engaging with the students that you supervise and your colleagues, are those in line with kind of the mission and goals of the division that you're working in or the institution that you're at? I think it's really important to know what those are and to make sure that even before you make a decision about what grad school you're going to attend, that you are on board with that mission and that vision to make sure that your values align with those values. Next slide. Yeah.
Okay. I know that we're very short on time, so I'm actually going to go right to this coping mechanism slide, and then we'll wrap up here. So the last piece that we have to talk about is kind of like managing change. And so over the next couple of months, it's very unlikely that we will have some definitive answers about our life. And so feel free to use one of the words that I have up on the screen for some kind of way that you are able to, oh wait, actually. Go to the next slide. And yeah, so it'll just share with us some of those coping mechanisms. And these are things to think about because in terms of psychology, right, we can't really control a lot of these external things that are happening. Even as graduate students, we might be in a situation where we're trying to figure out what to do and what next decision is best for us personally. And that's kind of all we can control is what's within our own little circle. So I just want to draw some attention to the fact that it's important that we have these coping mechanisms, but it's important that we take care of our psychological health. But it's also important to reflect on kind of what are those things that are stressing ourselves out, and then let go of the things that we know we can't actually make changes about. So some of these things are great ways to be able to let go of some of those things, and then also to figure out what are those things that maybe are a coping mechanism that you've been using to manage some of the stress that you might be experiencing in quarantine or in self-isolation or whatever your situation is, or an excess of work if you're one of those folks who's really doing an excess of work right now. I think that's the balance here too, and figuring out how can I do something that's productive for me personally, and that also helps keep my health and safety at my top priority. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to go to this just last piece. If you have any questions for us or want to connect more, please don't hesitate to send us an email. We appreciate all of you today, and anyone else who has the opportunity to watch this at a later time if it's shared. So, and thank you, NASPA. So thanks.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Whitney. That was fantastic. And as Heather mentioned, we are recording this and we will be able to share this out. So we're very excited to be able to share this with folks who were not able to join us live today. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Danny, who is going to introduce us to our next session.
Thank you, Jordana.